Good afternoon. Welcome to the Standing Committee on Education and Economic Growth for Tuesday, July 27th at 1:30. My name is Zach Bell. I'm the chair of this committee. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of our members. We have Stephen Howard, Gordon McNeely, Trish Altes. We also have subbing in today for Heath McDonald is Sonny Gallant, and subbing in for Minister Hudson, Corey Deagle, and also visiting today, MLA Michelle Beaton. Welcome, everyone. Can I first get in a motion for adoption of the agenda? Gordon McNeely, thank you very much. So today we have, very excited, we have a special guest with us. We're going to be receiving a briefing on the discrimination in the school system, in particular homophobia and transphobia. So what I'll get you both to do, if you don't mind, is just to say your name and your title, just for Hansard, and then we'll continue on with your presentation. And if that's all right at the end of it, if there's any questions from members, then we can go from there. Was that all right?
Certainly.
Perfect.
So my name is Marvin Bernstein. I'm the Child and Youth Advocate.
Perfect.
Hello, and my name is Rona Smith. I'm the Executive Director with the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, welcome again, both of you, and we'll let you take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to begin my remarks by thanking the committee for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm pleased to be joined by Rona Smith, our office's Executive Director. I wish to preface my remarks with a series of acknowledgments on behalf of our office. We first wish to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We acknowledge the continuing harm of colonialism, and our team at the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate are committed to moving forward collaboratively with all Indigenous children, youth, and their families in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. We next wish to acknowledge with gratitude the courageous children and youth who've allowed us to bear witness to their often daily lived experiences of bullying, harassment, and discrimination in our educational system, a system responsible for ensuring and nurturing a safe learning environment for all students. We encourage children, youth, and their families to continue to reach out to our office for advocacy support when such victimization occurs in individual cases, as well as for the broader societal purpose of promoting and protecting the human rights of all PEI children and youth within the education system. We also wish to acknowledge the unprecedented challenges confronting the Department of Education and Learning and the public schools branch during this prolonged pandemic period. There are many individuals in a variety of roles in the education system who have gone the extra mile for island children and youth. My daughter is a teacher in another jurisdiction, and I know this has been a challenging period for her as well. I note that there is an expectation of a public report forthcoming with respect to the events that occurred at East Wiltshire Intermediate School, and it will be instructive to consider the findings and recommendations contained in that report, which I have not yet seen. I also wish to commend this committee for wanting to find enduring solutions to serious issues facing students within the education system of this province. In reviewing the transcripts of previous committee meetings, I see that the focus has not simply been on the homophobia and transphobia experienced at East Wiltshire Intermediate School, but on the importance of exploring bullying, harassment, and other forms of discrimination in schools across the entire island. This is a prudent approach, in my view, based upon the information provided to our office as part of our individual advocacy function. My comments today will therefore not focus simply on the events at East Wiltshire Intermediate School, of which I have limited knowledge, but will hopefully illuminate a range of very troubling concerns that reflect indications of physical assault, sexual assault, bullying, harassment, and discrimination on a wider scale. As the Child and Youth Advocate for PEI, I have a unique and privileged responsibility to amplify the voices of children and youth. As such, I will be opening my commentary today with quoted statements and words from PEI children and youth who have shared their concerns with our office over the course of our first year of operation. Some of these concerns have been expressed in my presence, and I personally find these reported experiences by these strong and courageous students to be deeply disturbing and entirely unacceptable. In upholding children and youth's participatory rights, I will convey with no identifying information what children and youth and PEI have brought forward to date in regards to their experiences within education. These statements have been made to our office on the basis that their identities will not be disclosed directly or indirectly. Under Section 12(1)A of the Child and Youth Advocate Act, I have a legislated responsibility to, quote, represent the rights, interests, and viewpoints of children and youth who are receiving or are eligible to receive reviewable services. It is not my place to suppress or sanitize their voices and their words for more comfortable public consumption. This is their truth as communicated to our office in their own words. I will therefore share with you the unfiltered and unedited comments of these youth. Some of their language is graphic. I do this acknowledging and upholding the utmost respect for the decorum of the Legislative Assembly and the professionalism of your committee environment. Some adults here today, those watching live or reading a transcript at a later date, may find some of these statements shocking and difficult to hear and may even wish to turn away. However, as adults, it is our responsibility to rise to the occasion and hear what children and youth are telling us, what is their norm and often their everyday experience. With that preamble, I will add that the statements that I will be sharing are for the most part those made by youth who are 12 to 15 years of age. But they also include, in a couple of instances, statements from 16 and 17-year-olds. As I read out these quotes, I will be indicating whether the statement is from a single youth or from multiple youth. I will now begin. First quote, students talk about our vaginas, the smells of them. Bus drivers either ignore it, laugh along, or yell, from a single youth. Quote, a student puts their phone up the shirts of girls. He takes pictures and shares them. He shares other porn openly, from a single youth. Guys can be taking their clothes off in the halls and no one does anything, from a single youth. Quote, it's an everyday occurrence. Guys shoving girls up against lockers and walls to feel them up, from a single youth. Quote, EAs, teachers, principals, vice principals, they are all dropping the ball for us, from a single youth. Quote, I bring up issues and I'm still getting threatened by other kids a month later, from a single youth. Quote, even when you think it's resolved, you get threatened even more, from a single youth. I feel guilty graduating knowing this is what younger kids are going to have to put up with, and I'm not going to be here to help, from a single youth. Quote, all of this affects your learning. Marks would be higher if the class would shut up, from a single youth. Quote, adults just blame Snapchat or TikTok and say boys will be boys, from multiple youth. Quote, students shout the gays can't run to make the bus, from a single youth. Quote, the N-word is shouted out the windows of buses. Younger kids can hear it. It is shouted at students from indigenous communities, from a single youth. Quote, when a fight is happening, teachers know. They just say kids are excited to go outside to try to pretend they don't know what's happening, from a single youth. Quote, girls' asses get smacked hard. You can hear it. It's a competition to get the most and feel us up to see what kind of underwear we're wearing. This went on for a month from a single youth. Quote, "This is normal. It happens every day. No one even believes the EAs when they report it, or they are told not to worry about it," from a single youth. Quote, "We're shown videos on the Holocaust with piles of dead bodies, but then told to teach ourselves about residential schools, sexual assault of children, rape because it's too graphic," from a single youth. Quote, "It feels like we're stuck in the 80s because nothing has evolved," from a single youth. Quote, "The dress code is sexist," from multiple youth. Quote, "I should be able to come to school peacefully," from a single youth. Quote, "A kid calls me gay because I hang out with another kid," from a single youth. Quote, "Younger kids on the bus hear all this stuff, it's not right," from a single youth. Quote, "Girls are being sexually assaulted and physically touched," from a single youth. Quote, "Teachers have given up," from multiple youth. Quote, "You're going to have to try something different," from a single youth. Quote, "I don't feel safe because nothing is changing," from a single youth. So those are the voices of young people who have shared their experiences with our office. Our office has heard directly from parents and adult allies raising their concerns for children and youth safety and education as well. Staff of our office have heard the following reported by adults. 3 quotes. The first is, "Kids aren't attending and are dropping out because of this." Second quote, "My child won't sleep in their own bed anymore. They are so anxious about school." And the last, "My happy, joyful, sweet child is now suicidal." So thank you to the committee members present, to the live audience, and any future readers of these statements for your willingness to hear and learn from the voices of PEI's children and youth who've shared their lived experiences with the office. Now I want to move into general comments about children's rights in the educational context. As you can see from these quotes, the concerns about homophobia and transphobia at East Wiltshire Intermediate School, while alarming in and by themselves, do not represent the full extent of adverse experiences of students in other island schools. With prior knowledge of these voices of other students, I stated in my media interviews after the events at East Wiltshire Intermediate School that I believe that the concerns evidenced at that particular school were simply the tip of the iceberg. I also asserted that children and youth in PEI have the right to access an appropriate standard of education in a safe learning environment and be protected in educational settings from all forms of discrimination and violence, be it physical assault, sexual assault, bullying, harassment, homophobia, transphobia, or any form of emotional degradation. These are rights guaranteed in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and in human rights legislation. As to the questions I raised in media interviews regarding East Wiltshire Intermediate School about whether there was advanced knowledge of these homophobic activities, whether there was sufficient support by school administration and teachers for the values enshrined in Pride Day celebrations, whether sufficient preventative action was taken by school administration and teachers, and why the students dressed in black were feeling so emboldened in their opposition to these celebrations. These questions were based upon media accounts I had read over the weekend and not based upon any personal knowledge. Having said that, I have been fortunate to consult with and obtain the views of credible professional sources both in this province and across Canada. A PEI source has expressed the view that homophobia and transphobia are not localized in a particular school, but are pervasive across the educational system on the island. An important observation conveyed by this credible source is that there is a distinction between interpersonal bullying, which targets a particular individual and, of course, can be insidious by itself, and gender identity bullying in the case of homophobia and transphobia, which targets an entire community. This same source went on to express the view that when it comes to homophobia and transphobia, there is embedded in the PEI school culture a fear of rocking the boat and triggering a call from an angry parent who may be opposed to broader gender identity initiatives in the schools. This source added that children and youth cannot learn and benefit from any curriculum when they are subject to homophobia and transphobia and do not feel safe and secure and welcome. Finally, the same source also expressed the concern that there is no explicit right to student safety from homophobia and transphobia that is spelled out in PEI schools, and no corresponding mandate for teachers to ensure such safety. The important takeaway, then, is both understanding and addressing the dynamics and potential structural deficits that gave rise to the recent incidents of homophobia and transphobia at East Wiltshire Intermediate School, while at the same time appreciating that it is only one manifestation of violence and discrimination, albeit a very serious one, that is occurring in other island schools. We are therefore left to answer the larger systemic question: how do we create a safe learning environment for PEI children and youth in all island schools? In exploring these rights-based issues, it is imperative that we avoid vilifying any particular child or youth or group of children or youth. A child or youth may not be entirely aware of the implications of their actions and may think that their taunting behavior is the norm, either because it was done to them previously or because it is not discouraged by their own parents or caregivers. As conveyed to us by one Canadian subject matter expert with whom we consulted, quote, "This is a systems problem. It is not a child and youth problem." She went on, "This problem lies in the ways in which we create hierarchical systems designed for adults working in them and not for youth themselves. This is why a focus on prevention and education for students, parents, educators, and our broader community, rather than focusing on student punishment, is so important." In recent research conducted by Children First Canada with other colleagues, a report was disseminated called Raising Canada 2020, Top 10 Threats to Childhood in Canada and the Impact of COVID-19. This report bluntly states, quote, "Children who are involved as both victims and perpetrators of bullying are at the highest risk for suicide." Now I want to move on to the importance of my independent role as Child and Youth Advocate and my powers under the PEI Child and Youth Advocate Act. As you know, our office was established on July 15th, 2020, and we just celebrated our first anniversary. The office is independent of government. This is a key requirement of any credible and fully functioning Child and Youth Advocate office. It is a well-established international standard for offices promoting and protecting the human rights of children and youth. As an independent officer of the PEI Legislative Assembly, I do not report to any branch of the provincial government, but to the full Legislative Assembly through the office of the Speaker. Independence also means that within our office we are impartial and nonpartisan in our words and actions. It provides our office with the opportunity to serve children and youth and to advance their rights and well-being within the statutory parameters of the PEI Child and Youth Advocate Act. It allows us to speak freely and publicly about issues that are important to children and youth. It enables us to have a higher level of credibility so that when the public hears from us, they can be confident that we are speaking on behalf of children and youth and not simply on behalf of government. My mandate under the PEI Child and Youth Advocate Act is broad and layered. It involves representing the rights, interests, and viewpoints of all PEI children and youth through advocacy, reviews, investigations, public education, research, and child and youth engagement. Advocacy, reviews, and investigations can be both individual or systemic in relation to reviewable services, which includes the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning. The governing legislation also stipulates that I may exercise my investigation authority, thus reinforcing my discretion in this sphere of activity. My staff and I have had the opportunity to review the transcripts of your June 15th, June 22nd, and July 13th committee meetings. In order to clarify a few matters that were under discussion, I wish to point out first that there is no authority in the Child and Youth Advocate Act for any person or committee to order or direct me to undertake any particular activity, although I always take all such requests very seriously. Secondly, I do not need to wait for a request or an invitation to undertake any of the functions that are set out in my legislative mandate. I can act on my own motion where I deem it appropriate to do so. My choice of actions can vary. Each decision, each course of action decided upon within our office is methodically reflected upon with critical thinking and always through the lens of children's rights. My staff and I look to determine what roles are required of our office and what course of action best serves the public. Now I want to move into the limitations in the capacity of our office. So given the invitation you've extended to me to speak with you today, I wish to underscore the capacity limitations of a still relatively new Child and Youth Advocate Office. It has only been 1 year since the governing legislation was enacted and our office opened its doors, most notably during a global pandemic. We are very busy with a number of activities and have limited staff and resource capacity within our office. I say respectfully that we are not in a position to launch into a full-scale investigation that would comprise, in the words of this committee, an examination of, quote, discrimination in the school system based on age, association, color, race, ethnic or national origin, creed or religion, criminal conviction, disability, family or marital status, gender expression and gender identity, political belief, sex, sexual orientation, or source of income. Our office's mandate as a single independent office is not to do government's work or to take on the effort to address every form of discrimination within a public service. Since our office opened a little over a year ago, aside from other areas of responsibility, we have met the needs of 218 requests for advocacy services, impacting a combined 273 children and youth. 54% of these children are under the age of 12. 66%, or 2/3 of all calls to our office, involve child protection services. In contrast, only 10% of the referrals to our office involve education, which illustrates the point that education, while an important reviewable service, is not the single most pressing area of concern within the function of our office. Our individual advocacy requests, as described, continue to increase month over month as more individuals become aware of the new legislation and mandate of our office. Our office needs to move forward with feasible, actionable steps that are realistic and scalable within human and financial resources and can make a tangible difference in the life conditions of children and youth in this province. Now I want to move into potential options for our office. At this juncture, my staff and I believe that we do not have the staffing or capacity to undertake a full-scale investigation. But we do not want to stand on the sidelines either. That would be delivering the wrong message to children and youth in this province. And we are willing to consider undertaking a few focused potential options in response to what appears to be a serious systemic issue. So what are these options? They would include, first, child and youth engagement opportunities as a participatory right to further create amplification for the experiences of children and youth within education. This could take the form of a survey, a child and youth summit, a series of child and youth focus groups, or a child and youth forum. Structures that can be developed to further create safe space for children and youth to give effect to the right to express their views and be heard in matters affecting them. This approach could provide students from across the province with the opportunity to contribute without stigma and vilification or further trauma. Our office could oversee the supports necessary to ensure physical and mental safe space is created to allow us all, as the adults of our community, to learn further and hear directly from children and youth in PEI who experience our education system daily. They would not only be asked to describe whether they have experienced a safe learning environment, but the key factors that contribute to such an environment and their recommendations for positive systemic change. Secondly, another option, an examination conducted by our office providing public feedback on selected policies through a child rights lens, using the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by Canada almost 30 years ago, as our primary reference guide. Examples of such policies would be the Safe and Caring Learning Environments Policy and Operational Procedure, and also the draft guidelines for respecting, accommodating, and supporting gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation in our schools. And thirdly, additionally, an examination conducted by our office on what formal complaints mechanisms are available for children, youth, and their families through a children's rights lens to have fair, transparent, and publicly accessible processes to elevate their concerns as needed. Here it seems, based upon the experience of our office, that many children, youth, and parents do not know how to challenge actions that are contributing to children and youth feeling unsafe and fearful in their school learning environment, or how to neutralize power imbalances and include support persons as part of that process, or how to include our office to support parents, young people who are engaging in that complaints review process, and to make sure that these responses are being provided in a timely fashion. As previously referenced, we've also been consulting with experts in the field, and there may be more that we could consider doing based upon further consultation and advice. So as I said, we do not want to stand on the sidelines. We want to be contributing in a significant way to address this serious systemic problem. So I wish to conclude with some final remarks. In conclusion, I wish to stress that at the end of the day, legislation, regulations, directives, policies, and guidelines are only words on a page. And what is required is an attitudinal shift and a commitment by all of us to take the necessary action steps. What is required in the view of our office is a child rights approach, which has been defined by the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child as one that, quote, requires a paradigm shift towards respecting and promoting the human dignity and the physical and psychological integrity of children as rights-bearing individuals, rather than perceiving them primarily as victims or as objects of charity. In a webinar to launch the Global Safe to Learn Strategy 2021 to 2024, with Canada being one of 14 sponsors, and which I viewed last week, the case was made that if we do not invest in creating a safer learning environment for our children, we will see an increasing number of negative impacts. For example, children and youth who feel depressed, are anxious, are fearful, attend school less frequently, or drop out entirely, experience lower grades academically, suffer from mental health and addictions, are more prone to accept or inflict violence, and even engage in self-destructive or suicidal acts. I close my remarks with the important words of a youth reflecting on their fears and inability to feel safe at school. Quote, "This happens all the time." So Rona and I are happy to take some questions at this point. However, our responses may be limited due to the privacy safeguards set out in the PEI Child and Youth Advocate Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernstein. We really appreciate it. So we will open it up to questions, and we'll start with Stephen Howard.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for coming in today. It's been great to hear from you here. And I heard you say we're dealing with systems designed for those working in those systems, not the students living in them. And I think that's really at the heart of what I would like to see change here as well. So I know I don't have to convince you that the voice of youth is an important part that we're missing out of this equation here. And I was happy to hear you speak of a child and youth engagement survey or some way to get that voice bubbling up. So on that note, I was wondering what kind of information flows voluntarily from the Department of Education to your department or to you right now as far as any issues within the public school system?
Well, we did receive some information previously in the course of what is happening now in terms of East Wiltshire Intermediate School. We've had no recent conversations with the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning, so we are waiting to see this report that the department has commissioned, like everybody else, and to be informed by the findings and recommendations in that report. But there isn't a regular information flow from the department to our office.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. That's something I would love to see changed. Going on to the department's draft for the guidelines for respecting, accommodating, and supporting gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation in our schools. What are your thoughts on the process that was used to develop these guidelines? For instance, was your office engaged in the development of these? Who should review them? Who should have input?
Well, we indicated that we're interested in having a conversation with the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning after they have received input from other stakeholders, that we would like to see a final draft and then apply a child rights lens to those guidelines and provide some further feedback. So that's something that we have gone on record as communicating, and hopefully that is something that we can anticipate is happening.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. In your experience, at what level are interventions most effective? Individual teachers, schools, across the public schools branch, the department? Where could policies be applied most effectively, in your opinion?
Well, I think that it's important not to single out any particular group or any particular individual. We're not talking about individuals, we're talking about a systemic issue, and it really, as you said, Stephen, really engages everybody who is part of that continuum. So it would involve teachers, the public school board, public school branch, teachers, administrators, principals, vice principals, family members, the community, what kind of messages are we communicating to children and young people? We've heard as well from experts that not only is this not a child and youth problem and is a systems problem, but it's a relationship problem. So how do we encourage the development of healthy relationships and have children understand that it's important to respect the rights of other children, other individuals? What are children hearing at home? What are they hearing within their community? So it really takes a collective effort to kind of change things if we really want to look at this. So it's very layered, what we're hearing from some of the young people is that some of the teachers have just given up, that there is a culture of complacency, and we've heard that some of these incidents have been occurring for years. So we're not talking about situations that are just one-off or episodic, but they seem to be recurring. Some of the parents have indicated that they are seriously looking at removing their children from specific schools or engaging in homeschooling because things are not changing. They're not feeling as though they're being heard, and things are changing in a dramatic way.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. And you're right, it's been a problem that's been around for a very long time. And in my own household, there's someone who is no longer in school because they were bullied out of school long ago. So it's an issue that's been around a long time, and it's something that lasts for a lifetime. You've touched on that as well. These aren't just bullies in school. These have lifelong impacts right up to and including the end of a life, a suicide. So it's something we really have to face, and we can't turn away. It was really difficult to be a father of four and a new baby little girl and hear some of the stories that you were commenting on here.
I agree entirely, Stephen, and that's why it's important not to soft pedal or sanitize the language of some of these young people, because they have confidence in the ability of our office to take forward their concerns. And we should not be attempting to filter this so that people are more comfortable. If we really want to see some dramatic action, we have to be honest. We have to be truthful in terms of what we're hearing from young people. And we've heard a representative number of concerns from young people, but we also want to consider, as I said, a youth summit, to have something which is more representative, a truer cross-section across the entire province, and to really hear what they think is important to support and establish a safe learning environment, and to listen to their recommendations. What is going wrong? What do they think is more workable? What needs to change over time?
Steve?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we have that raw message be there and impact people as it impacted me here today. And in any case, I look forward to working with your office and finding ways that we can try to make that happen. Thank you, Chair.
We look forward to that as well.
Thank you. Gord?
Thanks for coming in. Thanks for this powerful opening, and this is an important topic. When you look at it from a systems issue, and I just want to know, like, when you're talking about, like, take elementary school, junior high, and high school. Where is the problems that you have seen doing your research, or where does that manifest? Where are we talking about a system issue in junior high? Is this starting in elementary school, or is this a high school issue?
Well, as I said, it's hard to answer that definitively. I indicated that the range of concerns that are coming to the office that I've identified today were principally from youth between the ages of 12 and 15. There was some sprinkling of 16 and 17-year-old comments, but mostly 12 and 15. So looking at junior high, intermediate, but it doesn't mean that there aren't other instances occurring in elementary school or senior high school. That seems to be the pocket of activity that has been raised with our office.
Gord?
And the reason why I'm asking that is because with kids in different age groups, some kids don't know. Like you said, some kids are learning things at home and bring them into school. Some kids are learning things on technology. They might not know they're making a mistake. How do we look at, is this a restorative? Is this an educational piece? Is their system broken? Can we fix it with education and coming together as a community to fix this? Or do we have to do this at a policy level and look at more severe punishments for these type of behaviors?
Well, I don't think that severe punishment is the answer. I think education, prevention, as I indicated in my remarks, that some of the young people who are engaging in these behaviors may have been victimized themselves. They may feel as though the use of power to achieve certain objectives is a good thing. It may be that they aren't getting the correct messages from their parents or caregivers at home. The idea of punishment is not going to change the situation. And in fact, I think some of the literature indicates that with some of these youth, there may be some changing roles. Sometimes the same youth could be a victim, could be a bystander, could be a perpetrator. So the fact that over time, if we engage in education, prevention, build in more accountability, so looking at policies, clearly. Do we have the right policies in place? What about legislation? So do we have the right kind of legislation? Do we have sufficient anti-bullying legislation in this province? So looking at best practices in other jurisdictions, what kind of experiences have worked, while at the same time making sure that we're applying these approaches in a way that fits the environment of the island, that we understand the demographics, we understand some of the causation, what can work here. And everything has to be scalable. But I think it takes a whole continuum of approaches, Gord, in terms of looking at education, but not just educating students, educating parents, educating families, introducing policies. As I said, having child-sensitive complaints procedures. So sometimes there are complaints procedures we find that nobody really knows about because they're not transparent, they're not posted on websites, it's confusing, it sets up a power imbalance where more and more individuals at different levels start coming together. It can be intimidating for a child, for a parent who wants to raise their concerns. So I think there are a number of different elements that we want to look at, and we are still conferring with other experts to determine, not only in PEI, but elsewhere in Canada, to determine whether or not there's some other approaches and things that we can undertake as a Child and Youth Advocate Office with some limitations to our capacity. We really want to be part of the solution.
Gord?
Yeah, and thanks for that. And I think, our island is growing and it's changing, and I look at how our society is becoming, more races are welcome in PEI, and that's, we have to look at racial discrimination within the school system. In my role, I hear a lot from different families. They feel trusted to come to me, and I hope they feel trusted to come to other people about any kind of racial events. But it's hard for them. It's hard for them coming to a new place, coming from a new school. Has your office done any work, or when you looked at this, were you just examining? Were you looking at race as an issue too? Like, how much over the last little while have you looked at race? Have you been approached with any racial incidents in Prince Edward Island?
Well, there's been, as I said, some indications of racism, comments in terms of one of the youth talking about the N-word being used, and offensive comments with respect to Indigenous students. And the kind of concerns, too, that we heard. So really very serious, and invite some engagement on the part of the criminal justice system. So that's why I was trying to emphasize that there was some indications of physical assault, sexual assault, transmission of child pornography. So we're not talking about sexting between consenting youth. We're talking about something that is being done to certain students against their will. And then, of course, looking at homophobia, transphobia, racism, the litany of concerns that have been raised with our office are extremely serious. We would hope through some further engagement with young people and through surveys or a youth summit, getting a better handle on how pervasive is this and what are the different facets of discrimination that children and youth are experiencing within the province. Of course, we want to hear the positives as well in terms of what has been working, what have they found supportive, and so we would want to ask those questions as well.
Gord?
And really, I think most people are trying with this, and I think this is a beautiful, beautiful place and a beautiful island. And these are crucial issues that we're talking about. But I think that we're at a critical moment where we all play a part in this, where we all can come together to make our society better. And I think we're close to that. But when I look at the Department of Education. Doesn't have a racism policy. When I look at some other things that have happened, it's concerning. But I think we need to grow together, and we need to be positive in our growth. And I do believe the teachers, there's students out there that squash this whenever they can, and the empowerment to do good, the empowerment to look at everybody equally is crucial on PEI, and that's happening. But we need to do it together, and I think that this is a good start, good information, but I really want to be positive with this file and make sure that people out there know that there's a lot of people advocating for them and don't want to see them go through this, and we're all in this together.
I agree with you entirely, and our office often gives the message that while we are an office that is a statutory Child and Youth Advocate Office, that everybody has the capability of being an individual advocate, a community advocate, a family advocate, can make a difference in the life of a child. And there are a lot of excellent people out there trying to do their very best. How do we give them the conditions and the resources and the support so they can do their best work? So it isn't really about pointing fingers, and that's not really what our office is about. Our office is never about pointing fingers and finding individual fault or responsibility. But how can we work together? Some of this is reflected in the preamble to our legislation. How can we work together and work collaboratively to improve the quality of services, to make sure that children, youth, families, communities are all benefiting and reaching their full potential? That's what we all want to see.
Cord?
And just my final question for now is what jurisdictions in Canada have done really well at this? There were incidents last year, Black Lives Matter, and we had an unbelievable people were marching for change, both for all kinds of things. We just had Pride Week, and it was extremely successful. There was hundreds of people out. What jurisdictions are doing this better, so we can have a look and maybe take some information from them?
I think it would be premature for me to answer that question. We haven't done a jurisdictional scan. These are some of the options that we're considering undertaking. So I just don't want to throw out a view that isn't supported by evidence.
Trish?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to return to something that you mentioned during your presentation, and I might have misunderstood, but I want to just go back to that for a minute. That there, I believe you said that there's no explicit right currently for students in terms of protection against homophobia and transphobia in our current policy and legislation. And I wanted to go back to that for a minute just to make sure I understood that correctly, and then to find out a bit about what are the next steps to address that if that's the case.
That was information that was provided to us by an expert, credible source on the island that has some expertise in this area. That was the view that was expressed. And I think we have to look at the policies in terms of being as explicit as they can be, whether or not there is some vacuum in legislation to make these rights more explicit. That's something that would have to be reviewed as well. There are rights that are supported through the Convention on the Rights of the Child, through human rights legislation, but I believe that the source that was communicating to us was looking for something within the educational sphere that was explicit and would give teachers the tools and the capacity to ensure the safety of children and youth who are experiencing homophobia and transphobia.
Trish?
Thank you, and I think that's absolutely the key question here, right? So how do we give teachers and staff the tools to be able to protect children and youth, to prevent homophobia and transphobic behavior in our schools? And what does that need to look like, and what are the best practices? So I think that it's good to hear that that is something that that your office is considering further. And I really appreciate that needs to be looked at. I also really appreciated that you shared sort of 3 ways that your office can work toward bringing forward the voice of children and youth in these issues, and engagement opportunities. So whether that's a survey or a forum, I think that those opportunities are so rare for children and youth now. And depending on the situation in a school, it can be intimidating for children and youth to come forward to their teachers or to whoever they're available to them to speak to. So being able to find other ways for children and youth to share their stories and experiences is so incredibly important and valuable. And I feel like some of those things are tied together, right? So, point number 2 on reviewing the providing feedback on policies through a child's rights lens, so we can learn so much through the child's experience. One of the questions I've had, and I've heard from constituents, is around the Safe and Caring Schools policy, and how has that policy been evaluated, and is it achieving the goals that it's set out to achieve? So I wonder, is that policy something in particular that your office has looked at, and through your work with children and youth, do you see any possible areas where changes might need to happen to make that policy work better?
Here again, Trish, I think I'd like to reserve on that until we've had a chance to really kind of carry out the work in respect of these 3 options and take a look at a child rights lens at these policy documents. You've probably heard we've espoused this a number of times in educational sessions. We really promote the concept of a child rights impact assessment and looking at proposed policies and existing policies through the filter of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, to assess whether or not the rights in the convention are being promoted, are they advanced, are they inadvertently being compromised or undermined, is there a way of mitigating some potential negative impacts, how do we accommodate all children? So in the course of enacting certain policies that we think are universally beneficial, are we disadvantaging a particular group of children? And how do we involve young people and capture their voices in that process? So I think these are the kinds of things that we're looking at, but we haven't completed that process. So I just don't want to take a position prematurely.
Trish?
Yeah, no, and I can definitely appreciate that. Thank you. So in implementing new policies, so for example, the guidelines around accommodating, supporting gender identity, gender expression, so you would recommend a child's rights impact assessment take place as a part of the review of those policies kind of before they're implemented.
Well, that's right. We'd like to see that with respect to all government departments, that before policies are being implemented, before legislation is being introduced into the provincial legislature, that there be a child rights impact assessment to determine whether or not this is going to advance the rights of children and youth in this province or not. And that's an important consideration, because oftentimes when we start kind of looking at those impacts after the fact, it's too late to reverse some of those negative experiences that children and youth may suffer along the way.
Trish?
Yeah, and I sort of wonder as well about the, that I think you said it was about 10% of the requests for advocacy services to your office were school related, and you know that makes me wonder, is that because it's not as serious or impactful of an issue for children and youth, or a place where issues are happening, or is it that they're not aware of your office or how to contact you, or there's so many variables that could be impacting that, right? So again,
You answered your own question.
Yeah,
I think it's
exactly.
all those variables.
Yeah. No, for sure. So sort of that must be very challenging for you, first of all, as a new office to try to figure out how to prioritize your resources, through that sort of, without knowing why that number is only at 10%, because it's hard to say, right? Yeah. I guess one other question I had, there's currently a review of the Child Protection Act, is my understanding as well. Does your office have a role in that review?
Well, we plan to submit a response once we see the bill. Our understanding is that there is supposed to be a public document made available from the Child Protection Act reviewed, the Advisory Review Committee. So they have had themes rolled up, and the committee is considering the themes and recommendations going forward. I had understood that report was to be made public during the summer. Then there is, as I understand it, going to be a consultation document with draft legislation containing proposed amendments to the Child Protection Act, released sometime in the fall, and then a bill introduced into the legislature this fall. So that's the understanding that I've had. Information in terms of the process has been communicated. We are anticipating a meeting with the Director of Child Protection and the Deputy Minister of Social Development and Housing in August to get a further update in terms of the progress of that of the Child Protection Act review.
Trish? Yeah.
Thank you. So clearly, your office is doing such incredible and important work. I think this is the first time we've had, or that I know of anyway, since I've been elected, the voice of children and youth brought so clearly forward. So I want to thank you for that. And I just have one more question about that. With all of the pieces that, all of the different aspects that your office wants to look into all of the work you want to do you have sufficient resources to do that work currently?
I would say no. I would say that we could use some additional capacity in terms of examining more of the systemic issues. So much of our focus has been on individual advocacy and supporting individual children and youth who raise concerns. We have another member of our staff who is quite substantially engaged in reviewing 2 child deaths that occurred early in the tenure of my appointment. But when I hear that there are significant issues in various areas that impact upon children and youth, that requires some level of examination and some systemic analysis, we do not have the capacity to do that on a consistent basis. So I think that's where we could use some additional staffing, some additional resources in terms of enabling us to kind of look at some of these issues. It can be at times rather difficult when you see in front of you a sense of social injustice, that vulnerable children are experiencing different forms of maltreatment or abuse, and you can't step in. You know, you can kind of scratch the surface and try and provide support to the individual child, provide advice to the family, see what you can do to kind of empower young people. But at times when you see the same kind of situations coming into your office repeatedly, you begin to say, well, gee, with that pattern, there's a gap somewhere. There's a gap in service. How can we get under that so that we can provide some recommendations to prevent these situations from recurring, from children being hurt, children suffering injuries, children being disadvantaged? What can we be doing? How do we connect the dots? So ultimately, that we would like to be doing more of that.
And just before we continue on, is it okay if we, there's a few more members with some questions, if that's all right with
Yes, yes.
Perfect. All right, Michelle?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation. I have to say, as a mom who has a daughter turning 12 next month, I have this level of anxiety, I think, as you turn that page going from elementary, safe space, learning environment to middle school, which is where we heard most of these concerns coming from. It makes me question when intervention or when education should be happening when it comes to, the 2SL QIA plus community, whether it comes from what is sexual harassment. All that education piece seems to come once they've entered into middle school rather than preparing them for middle school. So I just wonder what your thought is there on what other jurisdictions might do and how we can better prepare our students who are going into middle school for the realities of middle school and to do that attitudinal, behavioral change prior to us getting to that situation. I have so many questions around that, Marv. Like, is it a chemical, is it brain development? It just seems to be a very big switch from elementary school to middle school and the behaviors and what our kids are experiencing.
Well, I think that we should start these kinds of conversations with our children as early as possible. And we shouldn't just kind of wait until our children are on the cusp of entering junior high or intermediate school, but these should start at a younger age in terms of talking about the fact that they have certain rights to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to be protected, to have a certain standard of living. And it's also important to respect the rights of others. And that in communication with families, if something isn't going right, or they see something that they should come back and communicate this to their family members, that if they see something, if they see a child being hurt, not to just be a bystander, but to try and intervene, to be more proactive, to express support. I think all of these things need to be addressed at younger ages, and we sometimes don't give children the credit of understanding or appreciating some of these principles. We sometimes say, well, when they're older, they will be better able to understand some of these impacts. But we can see, for example, within the ambit of our Child and Youth Advisory Committee to our office, we've had children who have been 11, children who have been 12. We come into contact, they speak to their peers, they speak to younger children who are really well engaged in terms of the process and wanting to be included. So I think we just need to have these conversations with our own children at a younger age and give them credit that they can understand this. Of course, we need to use age-appropriate language in the way that we describe some of these activities, but holding it back and kind of just reverting to these linear preset ages. And children have different capacities to understand and learn. So it's not something which is a blueprint that at this age, this is when we start talking to children and telling them about their rights and their ability to stay safe and what they need and the value of communicating. So how do we do all that positively? I think, again, it takes a paradigm shift. We need to kind of look at things very differently.
Michelle?
Thank you. I completely appreciate that answer. And it's often the adults in the room who are more uncomfortable to talk about subjects rather than the child and youth talking about the subject. I'm a leader for a Girl Guide unit in Stratford, and we were talking about diversity, and they all knew what LGBTQ was. And they are grades 4 to 6. And so when you ask how they become educated, it is online through their friends, mostly not through their parents or not through the school system. And so I completely appreciate you saying that we have to be comfortable backing up the education to an earlier age, but I think it is people in the room, the adults in the room, being comfortable. And that brings me to supports, right? Because it's not just our educators in our school system that need to be provided the supports, but it's also all of those people, whether they're coaches, volunteers, tutors, all that kind of thing, of how to prepare them and support them in being open to having those conversations and meeting kids where they are, right? So I completely agree on that whole education and looking at, should we be backing it up, and where should it come in to play? And sometimes organically is better than anything, right? I just wanted to touch just on one other thing, school transfers. So often if a child or youth is having an issue in school, they would have to transfer out to a different school when things can't be reconciled. And I'm just wondering, I'm not sure we capture that information well as to why kids are transferring out of one school, and or even if we're using that information. So for instance, I've recently spoken to a mom who did a school transfer, put racism as the reason why they were transferring out of that current school. But then how is that information being used so that the proper supports could be provided to that school that the child transferred out of? And I'm wondering if there's any kind of other jurisdictions or any ways that data collection from that kind of perspective, which isn't really formal, but how that can be used in order to better, I guess, support folks in the school systems.
Again, I think that is an important point to consider. It's not something that I can answer at this point in terms of other jurisdictions, but it's important to being able to track this information, to understand what a young person has experienced, because they might be more sensitive to other risks, other threats in their environment based upon their past experience. And if that isn't being transmitted, if educators don't know about that background, then they may not be as sensitive with respect to certain areas in which this young person may be responding, and may read the wrong motivation into some of those behaviors. The other thing I can mention about, there's been some benefits experienced in other jurisdictions in terms of gender and sexuality alliance clubs. So bringing young people together with different diversity, different genders, some straight, some not, some transgendered youth, and kind of talking through issues that are important to them, building a bond, building trust, building respect for one another, informing each other peer to peer. This is another area that I think could be examined in this province.
Corey?
Thank you, Chair. I know you had mentioned East Wilshire School during your presentation, but there's been so much information that it's hard to keep track of it all. I'm just wondering if you can just quickly go over again if your office is involved. Did you say you were looking into the events at East Wilshire?
The East Wiltshire?
Yes.
That situation, we had hoped to receive information, ongoing information from the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning. We haven't received that information. I wanted to be clear because I made a number of comments after that weekend, because I was reading accounts of what some of the parents and what some of the individuals were identifying as to concerns about what teachers and administration may have known ahead of time. So I just want to be clear in terms of representing my responses accurately. That was based upon accounts that I had read. It wasn't based upon any personal information. And that's an area certainly of concern in terms of what has happened at that school, and the kind of behaviors that took place that seemed to be well out of the norm. But we've certainly sought information, but the information hasn't been consistently forthcoming.
Corey?
Can you elaborate on that a bit more when you say that you would hope to receive information? Had you expected to receive it by now, or?
Well, we had a meeting set up with the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning, and we had indicated that the meeting was really set up to address that situation and another situation, and we began the meeting, and I indicated that there could potentially be some form of public report, potentially some form of investigation by the office, and that seemed to preempt some closure to the meeting. So there was no further information that was provided at that meeting, even though the meeting was established for that purpose, and there has been no ongoing flow of information since that particular meeting.
Corey?
Sorry, so you mean the meeting just ended when that was?
Meeting
Explain that a little more.
was intervention by counsel, legal counsel, and the meeting ended.
Corey?
Is that something you would have expected to happen, or I guess why? I can't understand why.
I don't understand why either. It wasn't something I would have expected. We certainly, within the office, take the position that we want to operate in a way that is mutually respectful, in a way that's collaborative. That's one of the principles that's set out in the preamble to our legislation. And there's been this sense that we have to request in writing information that we want to seek or want to address, rather than just information flowing. And as I've said in the past, in the context of the birth alerts, that I can't request information in respect of developments that I don't know about. And so it's important to reach out to our office and to consult and seek information where there is a significant direction, a significant policy, a significant program, piece of legislation, or activity that is going to impact in a significant way upon children and youth in this province.
Corey?
When was your meeting with the department, and who was it with? If that's something you can share.
I think I'd rather not get into who were all of the individuals in attendance, but just to kind of make the point that there seemed to be a preemptive stop.
Corey?
And sorry, when was that meeting? Is that something you're able to share?
I don't have the exact date. Don't have our diaries with us. We'd have to look that up. It was some weeks ago.
Corey?
And have you had any correspondence with the department since regarding? Is this, I guess, that meeting kind of just ending, as you said, preemptively? Did that kind of?
There's been correspondence. There has been correspondence that has passed between the department and our office, yes.
Corey?
And has that correspondence been helpful to what you're seeking to do?
It hasn't yet facilitated a resolution.
Maybe just one more question. We do have a few more members.
I have a bunch more, but I guess I'll leave that be then. A number of the stories you had shared, or the quotes you had shared, in some instances you said that it was assault or whatnot. I don't know what the process is or how it works, but do any of these ever end up making its way to the police?
They may. So the role in general terms on the part of the office is to certainly identify for children and youth or family members that this may engage the criminal justice system, that the police could be notified and try and support that direction so that children and youth are sufficiently protected, so that there are situations where in fact the police become engaged.
Do you have a follow-up, or you'll come back? Perfect. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Well, in response to one of Corey's questions, you had mentioned that any time there's anything that's going to severely impact youth or a group of children and youth, that your office should be contacted. And I've been contacted by several parents, and honestly, I'm one of them that's feeling a little bit trepidatious about what's going on with the Delta variant and a return to school. We've got a mask mandate that's been lifted, a lot more travelers coming and going. No cohorts are going to be in the school system, as I understand, come the fall. And I'm just wondering if your office has been involved in those kinds of decisions, or if you have any opinion on what a safe return to school might look like, and has a child rights impact assessment been done on this return to school plan that we have?
No, we haven't been involved or engaged in that process. Having said that, there has been a very positive track record on the part of Dr. Morrison in terms of following science and following the data and making measured decisions. So I want to recognize the good work that has been done in this province, and to ensure the safety of the citizens of this province. Having come from Ontario a little over a year ago, I appreciate the value of living on the island in a place of safety. But in a direct response to your question, the answer is no.
Stephen,
That's good, Chair, thanks.
are there any other questions? Michelle?
Thank you, Chair. Just one more, and I'm hoping I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm just curious, I know your office has been only open for a year, so we're still going through some growing pains and that kind of thing. But you had talked about attitudinal change. It will be required in order to, or an attitudinal shift in order to really put forward the child's rights lens. Have you, in your limited time, gotten any indication as to whether government is ready to make that shift? If they're prepared to change their policy developments to maybe include, for instance, the child's right impact assessment as part of the policy development, and if there is appetite to make that shift?
I'm going to give a long answer to this. There has been some indication that government is going to be applying a child rights impact assessment to the proposed amendments to the Child Protection Act. And this has been a position that we have been advancing since early in my tenure. We have really advanced a whole of province approach to applying child rights impact assessments. The acronym is CRIA. It seems as though the Department of Social Development and Housing is treating this as something of a pilot project. Let's see how this unfolds. I suggested somebody that I've worked with from UNICEF Canada to provide some training. That training has been provided. Having said that, on multiple occasions, I've indicated that in terms of my previous work, I've worked with New Brunswick, I've worked with Saskatchewan, I've worked federally in terms of encouraging and developing training modules for child rights impact assessments and assisting in terms of identifying tools for child rights impact assessments. On many occasions, I've suggested that we should try and do this together. That I can be helpful in terms of identifying the various options for training, that I could be helpful in terms of identifying the kind of tool that would be applicable and appropriate here in PEI. And that the staff of our office was interested in participating in the training. We have not been involved in that process. And then the other indication was that a child rights impact assessment would be applied to the draft legislation. So the training which has taken place, the child rights impact assessment would be applied before the draft legislation is produced as part of a public consultation document, before it's introduced into the legislature. So it seemed as though from the timetable that there might be something like a 6-week window from obtaining the training and then applying a child rights impact assessment to a large piece of legislation that is going to have lifelong impact upon children, youth, and families that are subject to that piece of legislation. So the time frame seemed unrealistic, and also where we were encouraging a collaborative approach, building upon our knowledge and expertise and our contacts with respect to child rights impact assessments. For whatever reason, the department has determined to go it alone. So when you ask the question, I need to kind of put this into a larger context, because on the surface, it seems as though there's going to be the application of a child rights impact assessment, but these are confidential documents. We do not have the confidence that the competency is necessarily there to use the tool effectively to achieve the right outcomes. And we've asked the department to slow it down, try and find a way for us to work together, perhaps introduce the legislation not in the fall session, but in the next spring session.
Do you have a follow-up? You're good?
Just a comment, so that does not sound to me like government is ready to make that very important shift in how they draft legislation to ensure that that consultation and assessment's done in advance. And I appreciate your candor and your honesty there, because I think that's valuable information for us. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no other questions, I do want to thank you both for coming in and for presenting today.
Thank you.
And yeah, so we're just going to take a very brief recess, and then we'll get back to our schedule. Thank you. And welcome back to the Standing Committee on Education and Economic Growth. So the next item on our agenda is the discussion of public consultation on the matter of discrimination in the school system. If the committee remembers, we'd previously mentioned that we would do a campaign for public consultation that would run from about mid-month until mid-September. Just wanted to check with the committee to see if we still want to proceed with this, or if we want to wait for a submission or from a presentation from the public schools branch before we run this. Do we remember this? The committee remember this? We're going to do the public, if the public wanted to comment, or submit public submissions. Just wondering if we want to continue. Originally, our schedule was, I believe it was back in our June meeting, end of June meeting, that we were going to start those mid-August and run through until mid-September for the opportunity for the public to comment if they so choose. I'm just curious if we want to continue with that, or if we would like to wait until we hear back from the public schools branch with regards to the East Wilshire event. Trish.
Have you been given any expected timelines from the public schools branch about when we will hear back?
So they are willing to come in on September 14th. That is the earliest, I believe, that we can get them in for.
So, that being said, do we still want to have Stephen?
I think it'd be great to have all of that input ahead of the meeting with the public school board, so I wouldn't see any reason not to go ahead with that.
Okay. Trish?
Yeah, I feel the same way. Sorry, so what were the original timelines? Could you just repeat that for the public consultation?
So mid-August to mid-September. I didn't really have any hard dates, but and I guess I'd also be looking for kind of a specific ask for the advertisements and then for social media campaigns, just so the committee can determine what they'd like to have received.
Trish?
So yeah, I mean, I agree with Steve. It would be good to have that information before the meeting with the Public Schools Branch on the 14th. So I would suggest we start that process as soon as possible, and perhaps closing before that meeting so that we have a sense of what the public feels about this and what they would like to share. And
Yep. Perfect. Gord?
Yeah, I think the data and this information is something that, even we heard from a number of people, like we need more data on this and we need more information on this, and I think it's a good opportunity to get it. Again, my only thing was the privacy of the people who's coming forward, and that remains my concern.
And
Clark?
if I could just clarify, we can also provide the option for the submission entirely to not be publicized on the website, if they so choose. And then if the committee was going to, I guess, consider the matters, they would go in camera for specific ones maybe, or...
Okay. Stephen?
This was an island-wide ask, right? It wasn't just for parents and students at East Wiltshire, it was across the entire system, yeah.
Yeah.
So newspaper campaigns, social media, and yeah, a feedback form on the website, and then also in the an ask to put it in the school newsletters as well.
Stephen?
Right, not just the advertising though, but the subject of what we're asking for was not just in relation to only the East Wiltshire events, but, okay.
Yeah, and that's what we're kind of asking right now, is if there is a specific ask to go in that advertising or social media campaign. Like, is there a specific wording? I was wondering if kind of the members have essentially a specific ask.
Alicia, do you have anything from before when we brought this up, just to see where we're starting from?
Yeah. So it was discrimination in the school system based on, and then the list from the Human Rights Commission website that Mr. McNeely provided. So if the committee wants to go with something that open, then I have no problem with creating an ad and I can circulate it with the committee.
I think that would be fine. Would that be all right, Stephen?
I would just suggest that we reach out to the Child and Youth Advocate before we put that out there, in case they have any language that might improve it.
Okay. That's okay with the committee? Corey?
Sorry, I probably wasn't at the meeting this was decided upon, but what's the point of this consultation? I'm not saying what the information we given isn't important, but why is it coming to a legislative committee, standing committee?
For a chance, and correct me if I'm wrong, Clerk, but for a chance for if the public would want to submit essentially their concerns or with regards to something that was happening specifically in a school, if they wish, either a parent or a student.
To a legislative standing committee?
Correct. Stephen?
Yeah, there was talks about perhaps having parents and students come into the committee, and we found that kind of probably wouldn't be the appropriate place, so we changed to reaching out and allowing them to submit, and anonymously if they so chose.
I still don't understand it. Wouldn't they submit it to the proper, authorities or the proper institutions, not a standing committee at the legislature? I don't quite understand what we're trying to gather, but.
Well, I think what the committee was wanting was just a venue for not having everyone come in to present, just for them to have a chance to voice what they wanted. And again, if they wanted to include it, as the clerk had mentioned, there's they don't have to put it as in a public forum.
And just to add some context, it had originally come from a letter from Ms. Altes stating to consult with public, students, and teachers. And then the committee had decided that written feedback would be the best approach.
Okay. Is that good?
I still don't see where we're trying to go with that, but the committee already made a decision, so it's not, I was just kind of curious. I probably wasn't at that meeting.
Okay, perfect. All right, so next on the agenda, and that was fine with, you're going to do essentially a draft that we can distribute to the committee members?
Yes, and then I believe, and I might be wrong on this, and I can send it out when I send the draft of the advertisement, but I think the earliest we might be able to get it in the newspapers is maybe the 7th for the major newspapers, and then the 11th for the weekly newspapers.
Right, that's good. Perfect. All right, next, still in the same discussion of the public consultation on the matter of discrimination in the school system. It was also brought forward, I believe, by Trish with regards to letters to the Peers Alliance and Pride PEI. What specifically would the committee want asked in those written submissions? We had reached out, or have we not reached out yet?
Not with those ones. Those are two written submissions that we were going to wait until after we heard from Mr. Bernstein.
Okay. So is there a specific ask?
So,
Trish?
I mean, again, on, the matter of discrimination in the school system, what from their perspective and the work that they do, should the committee be aware of? So I think, I'm not sure exactly how we word that, but that would be sort of the general ask, and allow those groups to, to share what they feel is appropriate in that case.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that from the committee? Okay.
Just one small piece. Do we want to also offer if those groups would like to come in and present as well? I know that we had tight timelines with, when we first talked about this, about getting things in before the summer, but of course we're well into the summer now, so there may be, if they would prefer to present to the committee, I think we should also allow that option if we can fit it in before the next sitting. Would be good, or as soon as possible.
Well, when we look at review of scheduling, can we include that in the possibility there? Clerk, is that okay? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay. Question, Stephen?
Just, we should also make sure it's clear to whoever we're reaching out to that they could potentially present in camera as well if there was privacy concerns and the like.
Is that with regard specifically to the Peers Alliance and Pride PEI?
I would say that's across the board for anybody submitting on this subject.
Okay. Okay. Anyone?
I'm just thinking, is it the topic, are they able to speak on educational topics? Or is that something that, does this committee send a letter to the Standing Committee on Health and Social Development for I'm just like, I just thought about that as, are they coming in to talk about educational matters or just that specific, what happened at East Wilshire?
It's a good question. Cool. Trish?
Yeah, so Peers Alliance does do work in the school system, right? So they actually do come in and do presentations in different schools. I believe it's on invitation of the school at this current time, but that would be something to hear more about, specifically on education.
Does that answer your question, Gordon?
Well, I knew that. It was the general question for the committee, yeah. So, yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
So if the committee would like, I can add more of an education piece in the letter so that it is more applicable to this committee's mandate.
That would be great. That's all right with the committee? Sounds good. All right, so we will move on. And specifically, I guess, going back to that, it would just be kind of the discussion of the public consultation on the matter of discrimination in the school system, and maybe leave it open for them to decide what would be best for them to talk about. All right, so next we're going to move to the review of scheduling. Just one thing, September 7th, we are going to take that off of the planning schedule, and that is because that is the first day of school on PEI. So the next, maybe I'll let our clerk run through our schedule, but I believe it is September 14th will be our next scheduled piece.
So that day is the day that the Public Schools Branch and also the Department of Education and Lifelong Learning are willing to come in for the continuation of the discussion of diversity from the last meeting, and then also to provide a briefing on the incidents at East Wilshire. Tuesday, September 21st can be a bit of an economic recovery day. When the committee had sent out some letters regarding economic recovery, the community sector network identified themselves as wanting to appear in person rather than a written submission. So they're willing to come in on the 21st at 1:30 to provide a presentation on economic recovery from their standpoint. And then at 2:30, if the committee is willing, the minister responsible for the status of women is willing to come in then for the meeting that had been previously canceled on economic recovery from as it relates to women. That brings us to Tuesday, September 28th and Tuesday, October 5th. I left these ones open because the public consultation may identify people or groups who are wishing to appear in person. So it kind of left a little bit of a buffer there. And then if the committee's willing to possibly meet maybe 1 or 2 Fridays just to kind of tie up the work plan, finish it off. That brings us to the House opening.
When is that? When is the House open? When do we need to be
The
done?
planning week that's recommended not to meet during is the week of the 13th to 17th, and then I'm looking at the wrong month. Sorry, 11th to 15th, and then the House opens on the 19th.
Okay. Trish?
Could we just go over where we're at with the consultations and meetings regarding the Temporary Foreign Workers Protection Act?
So advertisements have gone out, and I believe there's a schedule being followed for the social media campaigns and everything. I've yet to receive any submissions yet, though, and that's the same really for the economic recovery call as well. When we wrote those specific letters, the only ones I've heard back from so far is the community sector at work, I believe.
Good. And you go ahead. Sorry, Trish.
So, and we also talked about inviting QPPEI to come and present on the Temporary Foreign Workers Act, because they had QP has done some work on that, both nationally and provincially. And so I'm wondering if we had agreed to that, I believe, as a committee. You can double check, but just because we will want to have those recommendations in before this, well, as soon as possible, I would say, actually. And I do have a piece to add to new business in relation to this as well that we should consider. I don't know if you want me to bring it forward now or wait until new business.
Let's go to Gord first.
Yep.
Just with the economic recovery theme, do we know where we are with the Premier's Economic Recovery Council, the information there, and is it possible that the Premier come in on that date to present on that, potentially?
I was told that they weren't ready to come in yet, and that was quite a while ago, so I can follow up. And then look at scheduling them for September. They are still in the work plan, but as far as I know, that report hasn't been released yet, so there might not be anything to speak on yet.
Gord?
Sense of when it was supposed to be released?
You'd probably have to ask the Premier
Well, let's bring him in and ask him potentially then, on that date.
That's ridiculous.
Okay, hold on here.
Why is it
Okay.
ridiculous?
Thanks. So first of all, with QPPEI, they have been asked, and we just haven't heard back. They're in the original work plan, is that correct?
I believe they are on the work plan. I'm sorry, I don't have it up in front of me right now. That's one of the groups that could possibly go in the 28th or 5th.
Okay.
It's really dependent on how much public consultation results in requests to appear.
Okay.
And then also if the committee is willing to meet on those Fridays, they could be a group scheduled for that as well.
Okay. First question for the committee. Does the committee have interest or not on meeting on the Fridays if we are able to get some of these groups that do want to come in and present? Yes. Okay, perfect. Trish?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about our timelines on that Temporary Foreign Workers Protection Act, those recommendations, because the department is going to need to, perhaps prepare amendments to that legislation based on our recommendations. Like, anyway, I don't know. I guess we have to present that to the legislature, but I don't want us to push that back. So if we can do that on a Friday, it's fine by me, just to get those.
And we also have Professor Faye Faraday, who you had suggested, and she's willing to come in. We're just working on finding a date that works well with her, but she's eager to come in. Yeah.
Maybe one of the Fridays
Or
might be
sorry,
possible.
not technically come in, but Skype or Teams, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So back to Gord with the Premier's Economic Council. So there has been an ask out. Is that from an original work plan?
It's an old ask. The letter, I believe, was originally January. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But that was the original ask, and then scheduling didn't result in anything because they weren't prepared, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So
Gord.
Chair, that's an awful long time, and I think a letter has to go out, a letter has to go to the Premier, and we've got to get moving on this. So I would like maybe one of those Fridays to schedule in that group potentially and bring the Premier in to talk about this.
So are you suggesting a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion.
Okay, what is your motion?
That a letter be written, a follow-up letter be written to the Premier's Economic Recovery Council, asking them to come in, potentially to talk about this, when the document will be tabled, as well as to invite the Premier in to speak to this committee about information found in an interim report, potentially, or a final report.
I may be wrong, but the council, I believe, is quite broad and full of many people from the community. Would you like to direct it just to the Premier and have him decide who should attend alongside him, or?
Okay. So the motion as it stands is,
Ask the Premier to come in to discuss the economic recovery and growth report, I guess, and then their progress on that.
okay,
Or the progress. Or provide an interim report, or where we are with.
okay. So is there discussion, Corey?
Yes, so I don't quite understand why we would call the Premier in to ask him when the report's gonna be done. Any other time we've done these types of letters, we just send a letter. We can actually still send letters or emails to ask when the report might be ready. I understand what he's doing. He wants to try to get the Premier in here to get a big headline and make it a big hoopla, but I don't, sure, when the report's ready, yeah, sure, if the Premier wants to come in, or we ask the Premier to come in and discuss it, but I don't support this motion at all. We can send a letter asking when the report will be finished, or is there a, how many, you said it's a large council? Is there-
Yeah, I just know that it has kind of people from different sectors who contributed to it. I don't know exactly the membership of the council, but in my mind it was kind of like business owners and yeah, and if there is a chair, I can CC them on that letter as well, so that they're aware. Yeah,
Might make more sense.
yeah.
Okay, we're still talking about the motion, Trish?
Yeah, so I wasn't a part of this committee in January when the original letter went out. So was there a request at that time for timelines? Where were we provided with any information of when to expect the report in the response?
No, there was no timelines from the committee requesting an update, and then there was no timelines conveyed to me as to when it would be completed. And in all honesty, I believe at the time it was a scheduling conflict, but just from my knowledge of it not being released yet, that was kind of my assumption, was that that was the reason why they hadn't come in. But from my correspondence, it was trying to find a date, so I can reach back out and see if we can find another date, but yeah.
So the amendment, or excuse me, the motion as it stands, go ahead, Trish.
Yeah, I'll speak to this. So I don't see a problem with inviting the Premier to come and speak on the work of the Economic Recovery, his Economic Recovery Council and the report. I think it could very well be an opportunity for the Premier to share this information with the committee and with the public, and that's how we should be viewing it. Should the Premier decide that is not the appropriate venue, I'm sure he will let us know that. But I think we should definitely extend the invitation, and as well as asking for timelines on when the report will be completed.
Corey?
What did the letter say? Was it back in January?
It was back in January, and I believe it was just for a briefing on the report, so.
So is it a report?
Corey?
I could be wrong, but I don't think it has been released yet, but I stand to be corrected.
So we're gonna ask
Corey?
the Premier to come in to speak to a report that isn't released yet or isn't finished?
Trish?
Reasonably, though, there has been a significant amount of time that has passed, so there should be something to report on that process, if nothing else, right? So.
Which we could easily
Corey?
write a letter to ask, maybe a little more directly. it just, it does, I don't quite understand what we're trying to achieve here to.
Trish?
I would expect in the months and months that have passed since the forming of this council, there would be certainly some updates on its work, if not a complete report. And I welcome that opportunity to hear more about the work of the council. So I think should the Premier decide that he wishes to respond with a letter rather than come and present, that he will do so. But I would like to invite him to present on the work of the committee. So I support the motion. Yeah, that's it.
Corey?
So the legislature did sit from, I don't know, end of February, mid-February to mid-May. So that was quite a chunk of time. And we're talking probably about 2 months since the legislature finished. And, we're making it sound like they've been dodging and weaving, trying not to come in. Like, there's actually only a very short time span of when they could come in. They're also probably quite busy dealing with the pandemic. And we're going to haul the Premier into a committee meeting, asking him about a report that isn't finished yet, that a large number of people are trying to work on. I'm sure the Premier isn't sitting at his desk writing it himself. That's why there's a number of people on this committee. I'm only one vote, and I'm clearly going to be outvoted on this, but it's nothing but a partisan ploy to get the Premier in to talk about a report that isn't finished yet, that a number of people are working on. So, but if that's the committee's wish, then so be it. But I still don't quite understand. Any other committee I've been on, we might send a second follow-up letter, which is usually the case, being a little more direct and saying that the committee expects to receive an update on when this report might be available or whatnot, or when you can appear. But anyways, that's my 2 cents on it, but I'm finished.
Thank you. Gordon?
Just add that our communities have been through a lot. The economy's hurting, people out there are hurting. So this isn't about a bunch of hoopla. This is about,
That's exactly what it is.
it's about bringing people in to figure out where we're going in a direction.
Gordon
And
is the floor.
it's been a problem with this. I don't know, January, and here we are in July. There has to be something done. So there's got to be some answers made. If this committee was worth getting together, which it was, let's find out the information. Let's push them to the finish line so we can help Islanders.
Steve?
I just speak to, Corey mentioned that the legislature was sitting for quite a time there, and it was, but the Economic Council doesn't sit in legislature, so if they can't get their work done while legislature's sitting or during the pandemic, then we're going to have quite a span without a plan for economic growth and recovery here in this province. So
But I think we had asked them to come in, did we not? Is that what you said the letter said?
Stephen?
that's fine, Chair.
Okay.
In
That's why I
the letter was an invitation to appear, I believe, to provide a briefing, yes. And that was in January. And I believe, also just for context, as per the transcript for the Hansard, that the Premier did say that it was done, but he had sent it back, as far as I know. So it is completed, but not to his liking, I think. Just for context.
Stephen?
It would be interesting to have the Premier in to let us know what he didn't like about it sounds like there's something to talk about, so it'd be worth an invitation for sure.
And Clerk, that Hansard, that's from,
This past
that
sitting.
was from a sitting in the
Yeah.
legislature, right? No, I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if it was from this committee, like a correspondence back to this committee.
No.
So is there any other discussion on the motion forward? And can you maybe read the full motion?
An invitation to the Premier to discuss the report from the Premier's Council for Economic Recovery and Growth, or the progress of such report.
Okay. So if there's no further, Trish?
I would perhaps just add also, and the ongoing work of this council, because maybe they're doing other things than one report. I don't know. I just thought we should add that. There might be more to report. It's been months and months, so they might have other things that they want to share. I don't know.
Corey?
Is there a chair of this? I know I asked this already, but could we invite them in as well, or?
The first one listed on the website is Jason Aspen. I'm not sure, it doesn't indicate here, I don't think, that he's the chair, but, this is the first one on the website.
Corey?
It would probably make more sense maybe to have Mr. Aspen in, but
That may very well be out of order, now that I don't think there is a chair.
Good. So that being said, if there's no further debate on this motion, I'll ask all those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say nay. So the motion is passed. All right, so that leads us to number 6, which is new business. Trish, you had something?
Yes, I do. So I was just reading that the Government of Canada has recently proposed new regulations to improve protection of temporary foreign workers in Canada. So this is quite new. I'm wondering if we can invite someone working on that, someone from the federal government. I'm not sure who the appropriate ask would be, but to present to the committee about what that's all about and what the interaction with our proposed temporary foreign workers legislation here on PEI might be with these new federal regulations.
And sorry, was that a department you had said, or?
Yeah, and just a notice here from, the Government of Canada that they're proposing new regulations to improve the protection of temporary foreign workers. So I believe this just came out yesterday, so I don't have all the information, but it's very timely. And if we are putting forward provincial legislation around protection of temporary foreign workers, we should understand how it's going to interact with the new federal regulations, or we might trip ourselves up here and do something that's they're going to interact in perhaps in a negative way or not, but we should understand it before we make recommendations. Not flashy or exciting perhaps, but important substance,
So would that be all right for written submission from, if our clerk can find out who specifically she would be talking to?
Possibly. Again, I would say, would we not just say you could come and present or provide a written submission if a written submission is sufficient on what the interplay between our proposed provincial legislation and the new regulations might be. 'Cause I don't know the answer to that. But.
I think that's fine, if that's all right with the committee. Okay. Is there any other new business? Motion for adjournment? Corey, you go. Thank you. Thank you very much.